This is my channel's weekly compendium, ending Monday, June 5th, 2023. Case file number 1134, written by Exterminator267, the Seagull that refused physics. When I was a kid, my cousin and I went island hopping in Maine. We still do. Well, one day, we were walking around this small island we beached the boat at. It was a quiet day, no breeze whatsoever out in the middle of the water. This island had no trees either, so nothing was blocking a breeze. There simply was none. All of a sudden, we heard squawking. Manic squawking. There were two seagulls, one flapping its wings and flying circles around the other. The other, you ask? Was standing, wings folded at rest, about 75 feet in the air, completely still. As soon as I shouted for my cousin, the still bird dropped out of the sky, and we heard an audible crack as its head and neck broke, blood decorating the rocks. The flying seagull landed next to his or her fallen. I had never felt so sad and confused in all my life. There is no possible way, in the laws of physics that we know, that would allow for that bird to remain motionless 75 feet in the air with its wings folded. Case file number 1135, written by 4RS Mitt, my vanishing savior. This has been nagging me for decades. When I was 7, I went skiing with my younger brother. It had snowed. There was a suitable hill nearby. I remember the wooden skis, etc. After some time, I had to pee. There were a lot of kids about, and adults too, out strolling for their Sunday afternoon walk. Germans did do that. So no ducking in the bushes, and all the winter gear I had on was in the way, so I had to go home. A shortcut, think hypotenuse of a right triangle, across the field was the quickest way, except for the deep ditch where it intersected with the road. I tried stepping up the ditch and kept sliding back down. My skis didn't have good edges. I started crying, being frustrated and having to pee. I didn't even think of taking the skis off. Suddenly, I get lifted out of the ditch, set on the snowy road, and I can still see the worsted wool overcoat and sleeve of the man that did that. I can even smell the damp wool, as I was held against him during the lift. I wiped my nose and eyes, collected my poles, and turned to thank my savior, and he's gone. There are people, but nobody wears a coat like that. No tall men, not one way, not the other. I had a clear view for a minimum of 100 meters, 330 feet, either way, and the guy was not running. And I was polite, so I didn't wait long to say thank you. I have been back there many times, and even measured out the distance on Google Maps. There is simply no way I could have not seen the person who lifted me out of the ditch. I have literally spent time timing people walking there. It takes most minutes to walk that corner, yet my rescuer was gone in a few seconds. Bonus file, written by Alex Ruzio, The Dark Side of Steel. I lived in a dead steel town. Buildings were put up somewhat haphazardly. If you imagine your typical suburban block, imagine instead of a backyard, you had another house or two. It was kinda cramped. My mom, grandma, brothers, and I lived in the 2-story duplex at the front of the property. It's more or less a traditional house, unlike the building on the back of the property. That one was 3 stories tall, and is basically a large above-ground basement and shed with 2 stories of apartments on top. The buildings were maybe 15 feet apart from one another. Anyways, my uncle rented the middle apartment for a few years, sold substances from it, got addicted, fell out of a stable relationship into one with another addict, went from being reasonably well off to losing the grip on his life. He ended up moving in with us after the city had to cut off water to the back for some infrastructure issue, and my grandma had them cut the power as well. My mom, bros, and I moved out shortly after she married, but he returned a couple years later after it fell apart. About 2 months into living there again, I'm up late and I smell a bit of smoke, which is normal. My uncle was always up late, usually high, doing something in the kitchen. Turns out this time, he passed out with grease on the stove. We didn't know that at the time, but as soon as I got up to check on the smell, my grandma screamed for everyone to get out of the house. We didn't know where he was, but the fire stopped us from getting to his room. A couple cops showed up after I tried hooking up a hose from the shed to a spigot, which was unfortunately tied to the back house's now defunct water line. I suggested breaking the window to his room, but the cop said that air might fuel the fire, and it was best to leave it alone. We tried banging on it and shouting for my uncle, but didn't know he was already gone at that point. Out of ideas, I woke up my friend from across the street and we watched from his porch as the fire trucks arrived. My uncle died. He was alive when they found him, but he died later at the hospital due to smoke inhalation. Even had he survived, this particular dose was pretty bad, and he would most likely have suffered some permanent issues from it. Anyways, the house was well enough off to be gutted and refitted. It was about a year later that my mother, I forget what she was doing, noticed that there was a light on in my uncle's old apartment. Given his history, we assumed it was some kid or his old unsavory friend squatting or lighting up. We call the cops, and the same initial responders from the fire show up. They cautiously go up the stairs, peek in the windows, knock, and shout without a sign from anyone. Sure enough, no one's there. They tell my grandma and mom, who are still confused about the source of the light. The power's been cut for a couple years after all. We go up there with the cops and find that the ceiling light in the living room is on, which doesn't make sense. We flick the switch and nothing happens. My grandma and mom start to freak out, which unsettles the cops, especially the one that had a few run-ins with my uncle. We leave and watch the apartment for a couple more hours until the light is cut out on its own. Didn't fade, just turned off. Case file number 1136, written by Guns for Hands, The Day I Cheated Death. Nobody ever believes me. I honestly feel like this should have killed me, but now I'm in love. Some sort of alternate reality or some crap? Maybe I'm dead. I pulled up to a stop sign, looked left to see if anybody was coming, was turning right. I didn't think to look right, because it was a solid yellow line, and it was at the beginning of a bridge, so nobody should have been passing. Well, you guessed it, there was. I pulled out just in time to come face to face with another driver in a truck. He was passing a car, going probably 60 miles an hour plus, in a 50, and wasn't in his lane. I, honest to God, felt this car pass right through me. I swear I even saw into his truck. He looked just as terrified as I felt. That's how close we were. Like his truck passed right through me. I stomped on my brakes and put my arms up, bracing myself from glass and whatever the fluck else my arms couldn't protect me from in a head-on collision with the truck. I opened my eyes, and there was no one in front of me. I looked in my rear view, and I didn't see him anymore. I almost started hyperventilating. I was so scared. I pulled over and called my dad and just bawled. He thought I was bat crap crazy. No one believes me, and I don't talk about it, but I really just don't have an explanation. Would you like even more content? Here's my Patreon. Now onto the stories. Case file number 1137, written by Beach Chair Ready, The Sandwich Lost in Space. I always thought of this situation as weird, but never a glitch until I started hearing about this more and more. It's kind of a silly one, but I still can't explain it. About 20 years ago, I lived in a tiny one-bedroom apartment with my boyfriend. I was making myself an enormous delicious sandwich in the kitchen, and had just put everything away when he called me into the living room to look at something on the TV. The living room was literally 2 steps outside the tiny kitchen. When I came back from my sandwich, a few minutes later, it was gone. Just gone. Even though I knew I hadn't gone anywhere else, I began to search our entire 420 square foot apartment. My boyfriend even started looking too. After a few minutes of looking around the living room and bedroom, repeating, "It couldn't have just disappeared," over and over, I went back to the kitchen to make another and saw it sitting on the floor perfectly. There's no way I could have knocked it off the counter and had it fall in the middle of the floor, sitting perfectly with everything still intact. Also, there's no way I would have just set it on the floor before walking out of the kitchen. No way. It was so weird. My boyfriend called me a dirty sim for a long time after that. If you've ever played Sims, you know when they are dirty, they will put food on the floor. Kinda funny, but maybe a glitch? Either way, it freaked me out. Bonus file written by Seagull, The Scent of Eternal Love. My step-grandfather was my best friend. My main father figure in my life, as I never met my dad. Before he passed, he had a stroke, and he wasn't able to speak nor able to communicate in any way. He was only able to move his eyes, but not so much. At one point, I spent the night at the hospital, as it was my shift to take over while my grandma and mom went home to rest. While he was asleep, I just had this urge that I needed to tell him everything now, almost like I only had this amount of time left, so tell him everything. I told him how much I loved him, and how much he meant to me, and that he's going to get better, and we're going to go fishing and do the fun stuff we usually do. The next morning, my mom and grandma get to the hospital, and my grandfather is still asleep, so I head home to rest for a bit. I get home, take a shower, and log into World of Warcraft, my girlfriend on the couch behind. I smell my grandfather's scent, as strong as ever, his cologne. Almost felt like he was sitting right next to me. Then I feel this really warm hand touch my hand. As I am about to reach my shoulder to touch it, my girlfriend answers my cell phone and touches the same shoulder and tells me my grandfather passed away. I was devastated to say the least. Fast forward to about 8 months later. I was in a dark place and just needed someone to talk to. My grandfather was the main person I talked to about everything. I was having a rage, almost like I needed closure to why my grandfather passed away and I needed him. I also needed to know why he passed and why something so awful would happen. He wasn't able to respond, which hurt the most. I have this dream. The room was all white, almost blindingly white. There's a table in the middle of the room, and I see this elderly man sitting, and I go over and sit down, and it's my grandfather. He asks how I'm doing, and I spill my guts out and tell him everything, fully crying, tears and snot everywhere. All he says is, "I'm doing fine, and I heard everything you said. Just know I will always be with you, and if you ever need me, I will be there." Then I wake up suddenly. My pillow is soaked, and I feel my face is wet from all the tears I just wept. Most surreal experience I have ever had. Case file number 1138, written by Shanna24601, The Time Traveling Skater. So this happened about a week ago, but my memory is still pretty fresh. My boyfriend and I were in the car on the way to get dinner and chatting casually. Everything was normal. As we pulled up to a red light, somebody caught my attention. There was a guy, I'd say between 15 and 18 years old, walking on the sidewalk across the street. I noticed him because he looked like he was straight out of 2004. He was wearing baggy jeans, a gray beanie, and a black t-shirt over a long-sleeve white shirt. I thought it was funny, figured he was some kind of skater, and pointed it out to my boyfriend and made some joke about the guy being from the 2000s. We both agreed he looked out of place, and that's when we started joking that he must be a time traveler. I said something like, "He's probably thinking, 'Whoa, dude, where am I?' And as soon as I said it, the guy started to look around like he was confused. We were in a car and across a busy street from him. No way he heard us. We remarked that it was weird as we watched the guy look around confused for a few moments. Then we both looked away for no more than half a second. I don't remember why. And when we turned back, the guy was gone. At first we laughed and thought it was funny, but the more we looked, the more we realized he had nowhere to go, and he really just completely disappeared. I can't stress this enough, we barely looked away, and he had nowhere to go that we wouldn't be able to see him. We both freaked out and drove most of the rest of the way in silence while we thought about time travel. We haven't really talked about it since, but we agree that it was obviously really weird. Case file number 1139, written by What a Pass by Jokic, The Quantum Washing Machine. So this happened earlier this morning, but it's still on everyone's mind here. I was doing the laundry and moving clothes from the washing machine to the dryer. While I was moving things over, I picked up my Optimus Prime shirt and put it in the dryer. Then one of my kids needed me in the kitchen, so I walked away. When I went back to the washing machine, I picked up the next item, and it was again my Optimus Prime shirt. I figured I'd just mistaken the first shirt or so, and threw it in there as well. A few items later, again one of my kids needed something, so I walked away, and when I got back, I again pulled out the same Optimus Prime shirt from the washing machine, and I said out loud, "What the hell, this is weird." And I threw that one in the dryer too. My oldest daughter walked in and asked what was going on, and I told her, and she looked in the dryer and she said there's 3 of the shirts in there. It's impossible as I only own one. So I go look in the dryer and yes, indeed, there's 3 identical shirts, all wet as well. My daughter gets excited and calls my wife to take a look to confirm we're not crazy. My wife takes a look and also sees the 3 identical shirts, and she knows I only own one as she bought it for me. My wife says she would take a picture and she walks out of the laundry room to get her phone. While she was getting her phone, there's a loud bang coming from the laundry room, and we all quickly go back in there. Nothing seemed out of place or fallen, but when my daughter looked in the dryer, there's only one Optimus Prime shirt now. We emptied the dryer, but in the end, there was only a single shirt. Still no idea what happened there, but all three of us saw the multiple shirts. This happened to me back in the winter of 2003, when I was 16 years old. It is by far the weirdest thing that has ever happened to me that I still do not have an explanation for. It was a dreary winter day. All the trees were bare, and it's gray and gross looking outside. There is no snow on the ground. These details are important to set the scene. So, one afternoon, my boyfriend and I were leaving my house to go somewhere, and before I got into his car, I realized I forgot something. I handed him my purse and asked him to put it in his car. It was a bright blue Dooney & Bourke purse that was widely popular in the early 2000s. I love this purse. I also had basically my whole life in this purse, my wallet and all my money, my Nextel phone, my makeup, literally everything that was important to 16-year-old me. I come back to the car and get in, and we go. A few minutes later I say, "Hey, you put my purse in here, right?" "Yeah, it's in the back," he said. I turn and look and see it partially covered up by some clothes. A few moments later, I turn to get it, and it's not there now. I'm looking everywhere. Eventually, I tell him to pull over, because the purse isn't here. So we pull over and tear the car apart. It's not there. I'm upset and ask, "Didn't you put it in the car?" He of course is upset too and swears he did. I swear that he even saw it in the back too. So we went back to my house, figuring it must have fallen out. We get back and start searching everywhere. Everywhere in the driveway, the road, my front yard, etc. My house and the driveway was not very big, so it's not a big space it could be lost in. At some point, my dad comes out from all the commotion and starts to look. We literally looked everywhere and it's nowhere to be found. After about 10 minutes of looking, I start to give up. I was very upset, thinking how I'll never be able to replace my phone, all my money, etc. I sit down in my driveway and then the weirdest feeling comes over me. I can only describe it as a feeling of warmth and totally calm, and it's like a voice told me to calm down and just look up. I look up and the purse materializes in front of my eyes. It literally just appeared right in front of me on our rock ledge. I say out loud, "Oh, there it is," and very calmly and almost trance-like walk over to it. My dad and boyfriend are just shocked because it wasn't there a minute before. My dad was standing right there. Everything is in the purse. Nothing is out of sorts. No marks or dirt to indicate it fell off the car or anything. And the weirdest detail is that there is no way 3 people missed a bright blue purse in the middle of winter with no snow and no sun. It would have instantly stuck out against the backdrop of the day. I even remember seeing it in his car. No people walked by as we were looking. Our neighbors weren't home. Just no explanation for how it appeared in front of our eyes. Almost like I willed it back to me. I'll never forget that feeling I had. I've never felt anything like that again. My boyfriend refused to discuss how the purse magically appeared after that. He was really freaked out and just kept saying how positive he was that he put the purse in his car. I no longer have that purse. In a weird twist of events, I sold it to a friend years later who told me a few months after that it went missing from her room and she never saw it again. Case file number 1141, written by Astropharmacist. I met a time traveler. Here's what happened. When I was about 12 years old, I had an experience with someone who can only be reasonably explained as a lost time traveler or a spooked burglar. I was sitting on my computer, which was right by the sliding glass doors leading to my backyard. Out of the corner of my vision, I saw a strangely familiar man standing by the short gate, looking at me. I lived in a townhome community, so there was a path connecting all the backyards. It wasn't uncommon to see other people back there. For some reason, being observed didn't bother me as much as it should have, so I shrugged it off and went back to playing my computer game. In my peripheral vision, I noticed movement and saw that the man was about halfway into my backyard now. Every time I looked at him, he seemed to freeze. I got a better look at him this time, and while he looked extremely familiar, there was something deeply disturbing about the look in his eyes. I could only describe it as dark. Clearly, the only logical thing to do at this point was to go back to playing my game, so that's what I did. The next time I casually looked out into my backyard, he was right by the glass door, staring directly down at me. He didn't look particularly menacing then, more like a man deeply perplexed by what he was seeing. Well, at that point, I felt like it was too late for me to try to get away from the window because he was literally directly across the glass, less than a foot away from me. So, in my most ballsy power move to date, I looked him right in the eyes, smiled a bit, and went back to playing my game. This must have deeply unsettled him, and he started to quickly back away while still looking in my general direction. When he left, I just went back to playing my game and didn't even mention it to anyone else until years later. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I acted any differently. Case file number 1142, written by Beloved X Siske, the white-haired plant man. I worked in a small private practice doctor's office where a good chunk of what we do is hormone replacement therapy. Lots of people choose to get subdermal pellets, and with them, you have the option to buy branded DIMs. There's a guy that comes in to buy this stuff fairly often, like often enough to the tune of once a month, and normally he'll call ahead of time since we've been known to run out to see if we have any on hand. His last name is one of a plant, and one that also has significant meaning to me. When somebody makes a purchase, they need to sign the receipt regardless of their payment method. This guy always makes a really dramatic show of just marking an X on the paper. He's a funny old guy with white hair that makes me smile when he comes in. Well, last Friday, he had an appointment for his hormone pellet. Okay, cool. I was doing other stuff when I saw somebody come up to the counter. This was a middle-aged dude. I thought maybe he was somebody's partner. Most of our patients are women, on an errand to pick up supplements. He said he was the guy with the plant last name for his appointment. The guy with the plant last name and the funny signature, I thought, was considerably older. But maybe he dyed his hair and got cosmetic work done? Whatever. He comes out and I tell him his total and give him the receipt to sign. He signs it with his whole name instead of just the overly dramatic X. He didn't buy any DIM like he normally does and then went on his way. I thought about it all weekend and decided to check the past charge history on him to see if maybe I was confusing him for another patient. The only other person with the same last name is his wife, who is a woman with a chart as well, so I know I didn't confuse two people with the last same name, since he's the only man. So Monday rolled around and I plugged in the name, and sure enough, it was that guy who came in about once a month for DIM, and the purchase history proved it. The strange thing was that when I plugged in the name, only his name appeared. He had a wife with the same last name before. I went and looked at his profile, and he said he was in a domestic partnership. What? No. The last time he had an actual legal wife with the matching last name. And then a few hours later, I saw an old man with white hair come in. He said he was here to get a bottle of DIM. I grabbed a bottle and told him the cost and asked for his birthday so I could pull his chart, as we don't just sell it to people off the street, and you have to be a patient of ours. I plugged in the birthday he gave me, and it was the birthday of the guy who had changed in the timeline. He gave me his credit card to pay, and the name was the same. There wasn't anybody else with that birthday in our system. I just kind of stared at him as best as I could while still being professional as he signed the receipt. He did a fancy little signature routine, but it wasn't the same overdramatic X from before. He took this bottle of DIM and left. Immediately, I pulled up the previous Friday's schedule and checked it. Sure enough, he had had a pellet insertion in the previous Friday and came in and had the appointment and paid and everything. This was not the same person in looks or his signature, but we don't have anybody else with that name or birthday. You can get in a lot of trouble for doing the wrong procedure on the wrong person, but neither the medical assistant or the doctor said anything when these were clearly two different people. I was actually laid off at the end of the day, or else I'd take a special note about when he came in next. I guess nobody will ever know the mystery of the body-shifting patient, but if anybody has any ideas, I'd love to hear them. Case file number 1143, written by D.S. Caramouche, A Biker's Strange Multiverse Journey. I left work at 20:39, or 8:39 p.m. My home was about 30 miles away. I hopped on my motorcycle and got on the road. Just as I got into the access ramp, I blinked heavily to avoid being blinded by a passing truck. Then I opened my eyes and found myself in a completely different place that I could not recognize, the motorcycle still going at a decent speed. The highway that takes me home was accompanied by the usual urban landscape. I was sitting in the middle of a small road with woods around me. I felt stiff and cramped, as if I had been riding for miles non-stop, and my helmet was gone from my face. The helmet wasn't the only thing missing. Once I stopped, I realized my jacket, wallet, my backpack, and my shirt were all gone. I was riding in my tank top. The clothes I had left were stained with mud and torn in a few places, and I had a dozen small cuts and bumps on my forearms and hands. Also, my knuckles and wrists hurt as sin. I pulled up Google on my phone and found that I had gone almost 136 miles in the opposite direction I was supposed to take. I had left at 8:39. It was now 4 o'clock in the morning. I had no idea how I got there, where my stuff went, how I had refueled the motorcycle on the way, and why I didn't remember a single part of it. My bike was running on fumes and died a few miles later, still in the middle of nowhere. I ended up having to call the cops to be rescued given the circumstances, who were just as puzzled as I was, but in the end, all I got was a tow for my bike and a ride to the hospital. The cuts on my arms? The doctor said it looked like the scratches someone gets from either rock climbing or being around thorns. 2 knuckles on my right hand were fractured, and I had dislocated my index finger on the left hand. It had partially snapped into place. The bike had no damage to it whatsoever, so I ruled out an auto accident or falling off. Only supposed explanation is that at some point I got off the bike and decided to play Rambo in the woods, then went boxing with a tree. It was weird as hell. Doctor figured I entered some kind of induced hypnosis or vogue state due to stress and instinct, and that made me follow the road. I don't feel like this explains it at all, because it still doesn't explain how I managed to refuel the bike, where my stuff went, and where my 8 hours had gone. I never figured out anything about this incident, since nothing really bad happened to me, despite the fact that someone tried to use my missing credit card to pay for $50,000 worth of crap. Also, I just realized something. My motorcycle is a Harley 883 Roadster 2011, which I converted to a 1200cc and took out the speed limiter. It gets up to 200 kilometers an hour, 124 miles per hour, easily, and that's hardly its top speed. When I came to, I was riding at 160 kilometers an hour, 100 miles an hour, which means I was hauling butt either way. It does not take 8 hours for a bike such as mine to make a 136-mile trip. It does take 2 tanks of gas, depending on how hard I ride, but still, this only adds to the confusion now. Written by Hellraiser. Something evil lurks on my property. I live on a 13-acre property in an area of my state where the suburbs turn into rural farmland. My parents live in the main house near our road, while my fiancé and I converted one of the barns on the back half of the property into our house. Our house and another barn are set in a pretty wide clearing/pasture, but beyond that, we're surrounded by woods on 3 sides. All of this is to say we don't get many visitors out here. From the time we moved into the house almost a year ago, there have been some occasions where I get this inexplicable feeling of terror while outside at night. I have lived in the woods my whole life, including in places far, far more remote than here, but I've never had this feeling. The woods are home. In every other place I've lived, they felt like my woods, but not here. I've repeatedly had the feeling that I'm trespassing on someone else's land, someone who is not happy to have me here. The other night, I took my dog out for his last walk. It was around 11 p.m., so it was pitch black outside of the ring of light cast by the floodlights on the side of the house. As I was walking towards the edge of the tree line, where my pup likes to do his business, I heard a sound like someone imitating the hoot of an owl coming from the direction of the other barn about 30 yards away to our right. I was so certain that it was a human making the noise that I called out, "Very funny, Dad." I just assumed it was my father closing up the barn for the night, and he was taking the opportunity to try to spook me. No one called back. It was at this point that my dog lifted his head from sniffing all over and froze, staring in the direction of the barn. His hair stood up along his spine, and he started to give a low, menacing growl. Now this dog is obsessed with all people and animals. Everyone is a friend waiting to be made. I've never seen him act aggressively towards anything, even other dogs that have tried to fight him. My dad especially is his favorite person on the planet, so there's no way he would have started growling at him. It was my turn for all the hair on my neck to stand up as a cold wave of fear hit me like a brick. My dog had stopped right at the edge of where the light met the darkness of the woods. Normally, the light gradually dissipated into the trees, still providing enough visibility to see the outline of trees and shrubs, but this time, it ended with a solid wall of black. Suddenly, I heard the same fake owl sound from only a few feet away, just on the other side of the darkness. My dog jumped and immediately started barking, putting himself between me and the sound. He's only a little guy, so I darted forward, scooped him up, and took off running towards the house. Behind me, I heard the sound again, but this time it had a strange warble to it, almost like laughter. The next morning, when I went out to check the barn, I found that the doors had been partially broken off the slide and were swung past each other the wrong direction, like someone had tried to force them open the wrong way. There were no signs of footprints in the sawdust or dirt, or any other signs of an intruder. I have no idea what was out there that night, but suffice to say, my dog and I stay well within the floodlights when we go out after dark now. Case notes, file 1134, the seagull that refused physics. Yep, this seems to occur frequently with any flying object or bird. As you say, folded wings. The seagull had almost certainly already passed away by then. It was already dead, in the air. But it took the universe simulation time to compute this fact. I think most animals are sentient, but I also think that the universe is capable of simulating animals as placeholders, decorative if you will. This is what's happened here, in my opinion. The program failed to load the full parameters for a few seconds. You weren't supposed to see that. Maybe you weren't supposed to look up there at that given moment. There could be advanced algorithms built into the simulation to predict what our choices will be. But in any given moment, these choices are not fully deterministic because we do have an element of free will, influenced but still able to break through what is predicted. So in those cases, you get errors like this, things you're not supposed to see. Ordinarily, you would have just seen a bird collapse, a seagull collapse. It would be odd, but not that odd, it does happen. Case notes for file 1135, my vanishing savior. Not only is it physically impossible for your description of the environment to have escaped away that fast, especially in a snowy environment. It's not like he could just run full speed on a flat, perfectly paved road. It would be slippery, snowy. But also, you were 7. No adult I know would just save a 7-year-old and then not at least confirm the child was okay, knew who his parents were, and etc. Even, a decade or two ago, after saving them. So yes, I think this was a force that saved you. Perhaps indeed a guardian angel sent from above, not your time. Even within the multiverse concept, there may be reasons why a soul needs to be tethered to one particular universe. It was a concept I keep thinking about. Because of the multiverse and quantum immortality, death doesn't seem to really matter. And that's good in a certain sense, it's not permanent, at least in the way we perceive it normally. But also, why save anyone then? Because they'll just switch to a different universe if that's the case. So there must be particular reasoning for someone to be in any given universe. And more to it than just that. Case notes for the bonus file, The Dark Side of Steel. I'm terribly sorry for your whole situation here. It's rough on people. They turn to any crutch they can in desperate times. I'm lucky in that while I grew up poor, I had love for my parents and the crutch was just gaming and eating food. But still being active, so I never got fat. Lucky me. When I was homeless, actually, much later on, just like 18 or 19 in Florida, I had such a good base of love to fall on that no matter how hard the physical times got, I only focused on the silver linings. I was still kinda happy, weirdly enough, baking in the Florida sun. I remember sleeping on Cocoa Beach in Florida, like a week after I got there. The first time I overslept, the sun fried me alive, so bad that my skin peeled off a few days later, like a snake shedding its outer layer. It was wild. I was actually in a hotel at that time, even though I had no money, because there was the manager of the hotel that saw me in the parking lot. I was just, waiting there in the shade of it was a above ground parking lot with multiple layers, so there was shade. Anyways, he saw me, offered me a room for the night, which was very kind of him. And yeah, my skin was peeling off in the shower. It was just, I was still happy, and I think the main reason why is I knew the future would be better. I knew I wouldn't be like that forever. And I think that's it. It's both the foundation of love, but also what really enables someone to endure hardship is genuine hope and belief that the future will be better. What I do wonder in this case, was it your uncle still living in that old house, as a spirit, a fragment of him, unable to move on from the burden of guilt perhaps, or total melancholy? I don't know, but something was tethering him there. I mean, I don't see any other possibility, because if the electrical line was just severed, cut, there's no way that a light switch could come on, unless someone brought in like a generator or one of those solar battery packs, but why would anyone do that? I don't think squatters would bring that along. And now time for the quote of the day. Nobody got anywhere in the world by simply being content. Louis L'Amour. You have to ask yourself where you want to get. Because if you're happy where you are, you just have a normal job and you're happy, maybe you have a family and kids, and that's good for you, well great. Then, I mean, you've made it. You've won life, I would say. But if you have a longing for more, well, that longing isn't going to materialize unless you take action to materialize it. And so if you're simply content, you're okay, but you want more, you have to form a plan in your head to get there. And that's the first step. Just use your brain and think. And then you have to make choices and maybe take risks. But the first step is just think. What do I want? Am I actually happy here, not just content? And then if you aren't, form a plan to get what you really want after figuring out what it is. Maybe that's the hardest part. Case notes are file 1136, the day I cheated death. So I fully believe you. The trick with these types of events is determining if it's precognition or quantum immortality. There may be connections there too, between them. I think in some cases, the subconscious draws forward from alternate reality permutations and buffered reality if a parallel world is nearby, close enough, as a defense mechanism in these cases, basically pulling information from what would be the future in different realities or your own. I think it's fun to mention that as a possibility. However, given there was no truck at all after this, the reset, my bet is indeed it was quantum immortality. And you're probably in a new universe very far away from the original. No truck at the same point in time is a significant divergence. It wouldn't happen in a universe right next door. Case notes for file 1137, the sandwich lost in space. Your boyfriend's joke hits hard. I've played Sims 4 a bit, mostly just to max out the fitness profession. I'd say this is a classic case of re-render error. I think the multiverse is involved. You looked away, no sentient beings perceived the object that was your sandwich, so it fades out of existence to conserve processing resources. Then you look back and error code results in it popping back in the wrong spot on the floor. Fairly simple and fits quite well, in my opinion. Because those errors only seem to happen when no one is looking. It's not like the sandwich was there, popped out of existence as you were looking at it, and then rematerialized on the floor as you were looking at it. No, it requires an absence of sentience, of looking at the object, which to me is just further evidence that we live in a simulation. Some environment where reality isn't always rendered, or enabled, you could say. Case notes for the bonus file, The Scent of Eternal Love. Another tearjerker of a story, oof. Thank you for sharing it. Indeed, I think his soul will always be with you, at least fragments of it. If he still lives on in a parallel universe, or all copies are used up and he's ascended to the next level of existence, whatever it is, I think for you, still trapped here on this mortal plane of existence, he knows you, he still loves you, and you will meet again, because his sentience, his energy, still exists. Eventually you'll join him. Maybe hard to locate him, but I think you'll manage it. Case notes for file 1138, The Time-Traveling Skater. So there's been a few stories I've read where people in groups see into the past, sort of like a holographic echo of what occurred there before. I remember someone saw an entire battlefield scene play out on a beach, or was it the remnants of it? Weapons and strewn about. Morbid stuff, but still an echo of the past. That was a very old story. Years ago I read that. This also reminds me of that picture of a man holding a cell phone before cell phones were even invented. It makes you wonder. Even though technically time travel to the past, it shouldn't be possible. If it is possible, it would involve the multiverse to prevent paradoxes, similar to how the speed of causality, the fastest you can move in the universe, is hard limited, and it'll even warp. Like if you're going at 99.9% of the speed of light and then you have a flashlight on board and shine it, well, technically that light should be traveling faster than the speed of light then, right? Because it would have the momentum of the train as well that you're already on. If you're on a train and you throw a ball, that ball isn't traveling as fast as you throw it, it's traveling as fast as you throw it plus the momentum of the train that you're already on. It has that kinetic energy built in just by being there. So how does that work if you can't go faster than light? Well, the way Einstein solved this is relativity in time. So if you're on that train, time moves differently. And speed, what is speed? Speed is distance over time. So if you simply constrict time, then you're not moving faster. To your perspective, to the light's perspective, everyone will all agree that light always moves at the speed of light and nothing can ever go faster, no matter, even if you have built-in momentum already, because time just constricts. If you go 87% of the speed of light, if I recall, then time for you, in your local reference frame, will be moving half as fast as time outside of the whatever ship you're on. And the closer you get to the speed of light, the more it ramps up exponentially. It's not a linear curve. I just find that fascinating, that the universe has a built-in mechanism. That to me just screams, we're in a simulation. This is all designed, so there's a hard limit to how fast the universe has to process. Why else have that? I think it's all built in because it had to be, because the computers in the real world still have a limit to how much they can compute. So it had to be localized and limited to some extent. Pretty cool. Case notes for file 1139, the quantum washing machine. The loud bang is the curious part. Before that point, I'd chalk it up to classic multiverse duplication. Transport, more like. What does the bang noise represent, though? So when objects duplicate or fade back to their original universes, there's never a sound involved in any story I've read. There's a comment I read, though, on this story, suggesting a snap from the air vacuum collapsing after the objects disappeared, the shirts. Which makes a whole lot of logical sense, as every cubic square of the atmosphere is under constant pressure. If physical mass is occupying the atmosphere where it vanishes, it would indeed create a sound as all the air rushes in at, greater than the speed of sound, back in to fill the void of the shirt, or shirts that disappeared. Now, it's not a lot of mass, but it's enough where there would be a crack basically from this speed of sound being broken, similar to the sound of a whip. Actually, this suggests that the objects in question vanish without first derendering. So I assume in the cases where objects derender and went out of sight and there's no sound, the surrounding mass, including the atmosphere itself, is also just not rendered. In that way, there'd be no air pocket burst or noise. So for some reason, everything was still rendering there in real time. Maybe because of proximity of so many sentient beings? Regardless of the reason, it's very interesting. And I think it even proves more that things do derender when no sentient player is observing them. Case file number 1140, written by Buggy77, A Winter Day and the Bewitched Purse. Case notes for file 1140, A Winter Day and the Bewitched Purse. I really hate that, when people just shut down and refuse to even discuss an event like this. Are you kidding me? If something like this happened to me, where I saw an object rendered in real time and then de-render in front of my eyes, I'd never shut up about it. I guess it's a layer of fear from the uncertainty and questions it raises. Ah well. I mean, I did have a tennis ball de-render twice, but never in front of me. They just weren't in the places where they were supposed to be. I threw it, I didn't really see it vanish, it just didn't land. And then the other one just dropped it and I could never find it. So I mean, in those cases, you're not physically seeing the crazy thing happen, which is a different layer of wow, right? If you actually see it vanish or reappear in this case in front of your eyes, you can't, I mean, how do you square that one away? You just can't. Indeed, I think waveform collapse is what's happening here. Matter is just reverberations of universal fields, multiversal really. Plenty of tricks the multiverse simulation employs to save on computation, de-renders included, but doesn't always go correctly. I speculate that it's related to predictive algorithms. So when we look back to where objects are, we know they were there, where they were, their configuration, parameters, properties, but if we weren't predicted by the system to look back in that given moment, It causes issues at the simulation attempting to reconstruct everything, but there isn't enough time, so there's errors caused. It makes sense. The more frantic we are, the more rushed, the more errors we'll make. And a computer is similar. If there's just not enough time, it'll have to sacrifice on some parameters and just almost load at random. Sort of random. And now time for the quote of the day. Always forgive your enemies. Nothing annoys them so much. Oscar Wilde. Yeah, I mean, it harkens back to the quote of, Christianity turning the other cheek. I think there is something to it. Not always. I don't think you should be a placemat. I'm not a pacifist. But I do think that there's a point that's reached where it's excessive, especially when you get tribal warfare, family feuds that date back, or wars that go back so far, bad blood between people where they don't even know what caused it. They're just living in their parents' or grandparents' actions and what they were doing. It's almost traditional hate. It's not real. They don't know why. And also, I think forgiveness, to forgive someone properly, they have to deserve it. And how does someone deserve forgiveness? To me, it's two things. First, they genuinely apologize. They specifically say what they did wrong and not couched in some, soft approach where they're not really saying what they did wrong. They're trying to apologize, but they're halfway in, halfway out. No, they need to fully apologize for what they did wrong in complete, explicit, specific terms, and then also take steps to never repeat it again. You can forgive someone once, maybe twice, but I'd say once. Give them another chance. And if they really truly take action, not just words, but action, never to repeat it again, then yeah, you can start to trust them again and forgive them. Those are the key approaches in my view. If you do that, if someone does that for you, and then, yeah, consider forgiving them. And then they're not your enemy anymore. Case notes for file 1141. I met a time traveler. Here's what happened. Was he actually a time traveler? Maybe not. The way you said that he looked menacing, dark, or he was looking at you specifically. So if this was a time traveler event, my suggestion or thought is that he was you from the future, maybe looking on you now and almost apprehensive to the choices you were making at that moment and wanting you to change them, but also maybe not understanding that time travel would be multiversal related, so whatever changes you made would only affect you in that universe, not his original universe. So it's not like Back to the Future where impacting the past will affect the future that you came from. It's all divergent from different universes. So you can't fix your present by going to the past. I don't think so anyways, if I'm correct in how time travel would work. And, this man clearly was totally confused by where he's at. Maybe he was just intoxicated. I think pondering on time travel to the past just fascinates me too much. And another thing that's interesting to me is maybe it's time travel not through technology, but what if our souls can drift in the ocean of time with the flow of the ocean? We know our soul can navigate through space itself instantly, anywhere it wants to go. So why does it need to be limited to normal timelines? I don't think it does. Maybe the soul can travel to the past, unbeknownst to the person whose soul, is occupied in physical form. I don't think he was consciously aware of it. But the soul is still information and energy. So I don't think it would be traveling to the past of the same universe. It would still be multiversal. Case notes for file 1142, the white-haired plant man. So is it connected that you were laid off the very day this all came to light? Maybe a test given to you, like trying to alter someone's appearance, make it seem like they were someone else, and it was a test that you had to pass to not give medication to someone that didn't belong to? I don't know. Probably would have told you that if that was the case you were laid off, but the coinciding event where it's happened so close to each other does make me wonder. Given how strict it is to obtain any sort of medical pharmaceuticals in the US, I don't think that's it. I don't think there can be mistakes or errors like this. So I think the former person is probably the same as the latter. It's just a different universe. Seems to be in order, with obviously significant changes. Now time for the quote of the day. All animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. George Orwell. Ah yes, now we get to the rules for thee, not for me. If you have morality, law, morality, I think they should be entwined. Often they aren't anymore. But if you have a system of ethics, it has to be universally consistent, which means everyone can adopt it and it applies to everyone the same way. And then internally consistent with itself too. But in this case, if you have a system where some people are more equal than others. Well, you don't have an ethical system. You have a class system. I don't think anyone wants that. Not at all. Case notes for file 1143. A Biker's Strange Multiverse Journey. Damn, this is a cool mystery story indeed. You can make a movie out of this experience. Indeed, we can rule out alien abduction, since it's patently clear you were actually riding the bike yourself. Someone took over your mind, that's also clear. Now, was it a temporary mental discombobulation from reality, where you were sleeping through an entire ordeal, but still managing to ride a motorcycle perfectly? And also stop to hang out for a while, as you described, not requiring anywhere near 8 hours to make a 140-mile trip. So you stopped somewhere, maybe after you got gas, and just did nothing, just hung out, no one took notice of someone just standing there by his bike for hours? If we try to fit this into multiverse theory, you were blinded by the truck, which ended up hitting you, and you died. And then you were moved to a new universe, and maybe sometimes when making the soul transfer, there are errors in the process, where memory was not saved for the first 8 hours of coming into the new universe. So maybe for the first 8 hours, it was still you, but you were frazzled, disoriented, making choices and you just don't remember them. Maybe that, but it doesn't explain why you choose to drive 8 hours in the wrong way so slowly. And you were injured, your shirt was gone too. Outside of some actual possession, it does seem to involve the multiverse. But yeah, something probably happened during the transfer that just messed up your mind. For a time anyways. Case notes for the bonus file. Something evil lurks on my property. So I've heard that fake owl noise too, while walking at night on the mile stretch of road near my house. So I'm up to 15,000 steps a day now, by the way. Anyways, at the bottom of the hill, it's fully surrounded by woods, besides a cleared line that runs right through it where the power lines run through. Just as I approached a few days ago, that noise, like a fake, higher-pitched owl sound, I heard it. I knew it wasn't right, and it felt very weird and tense. Whatever this hoot was, it wasn't normal. And I don't think it was from an animal. Not sure if it's exactly related, because nothing else happened to me or Mr. Ben, who was entirely oblivious to any threats. In your case, the fact the door had been partially broken proves to me there is a real presence there, capable of manifesting against matter. So was it a spirit that claims the land as their own, where they had died a while ago? Perhaps. Or maybe it's just evil incarnate. Or maybe it's just an actual human being who was just trying to spook you by imitating the sound of an animal. Then I don't know what I heard, but yeah, maybe it's just that. Could just be the evil of humanity and some person was trying to break into the barn. I know I've heard too many stories of people describing exactly what you did. Particular areas as being heavy with terror, evil. This like cloud, a blanket that's over a town or a particular geographic area. Maybe evil exists in a more real form than simply malevolent human spirits or evil people. And now time for the movie recommendation of the day, The Perfect Storm. Sometimes I find myself heading back in time to hit the nostalgia trip, and a lot of modern shows and movies just don't do it for me these days, with some exceptions. Sometimes I feel like an old man who doesn't understand the new generation. So anyways, I watched The Perfect Storm the other night, and it really hits in so many ways. The first thing that struck me is how normal it felt. Like everyone was just normal. Normal phones, everyone had to go and gather together to interact in like a bar. They cared for each other. Like some person, some fisherman just meets a girl in a bar and she starts to care for him right away, just like that. And I mean, it makes sense because it's just your local environment where you interact with people. You're not interacting with thousands of people online. And don't get me wrong, the internet is fantastic. Obviously, I couldn't do what I'm doing now without it. There's some element of magic that's kind of lost with it. And obviously, it's Pandora's box. You can't go back. But it's just something to note. Anyways, the movie is really about character and risk and boldness and connections and love that persists no matter what happens. I think it's truly living life. I won't spoil anything, but it is a movie about fishing, the hurdles involved in persevering in the face of moving mountains. Also, George Clooney proves his acting chops more than any other movie by far. I mean, he's great in the Ocean's movies, but I really love him in this role. He makes you feel like he really is a captain, and he truly loves it. What else can you want from life, besides loving what you do? So, highly recommended. Like the video, subscribe, hit the bell. Kinetic Symphony signing off.